Hey, everybody. Welcome to the People's Voice Network. Today, we have with us Eleanor Goldfield. She's a creative radical journalist, model, activist, organizer, and filmmaker. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Although I haven't modeled in the past 12 years, so that's not actually accurate.
Well, we got doing a little bit of research, and we were just trying to be like up to date on it, and we'll erase that, and we'll remember that for next time.
Yeah, no, it's sometimes people will find things that I haven't done in even longer, like, oh, she's an opera singer. And I'm like, dude, that was like 1998. So yeah.
That's awesome. Um, well, what we're going to talk about is that you have this documentary, the Hard Word of Hope, and it's very good and it's very well done, and it goes into the radical history of West Virginia and particularly the coal mining industry. Um, my question about the movie in particular was, did you know before? I know you are from West Virginia, uh, but did you know about the radical history before going into the movie?
Well, I'm actually not from West Virginia. I grew up partially in North Carolina and partially in Sweden. So
Oh,
I
Oh,
varied back and forth growing up.
okay.
My mom's Swedish and my dad's not. So he's the son of Jewish Russian immigrants, grew up in Brooklyn,
Okay.
so and then went to North Carolina because um but yeah, so I actually grew up in North Carolina, but I've part of my work as a journalist leading up to going to West Virginia for what ended up being the film was that I always wanted to try to get to a place if I could. And being like a
Yeah.
grassroots journalist that lives off of Patreon, that wasn't always possible. But when I could, I wanted to go because I always felt like it was important, if possible, to talk to people who were experiencing what I wanted to share, and not just take it as hearsay. And as to quote a YPG fighter in Kurdistan, everyone is lying, but the war is real. So to actually get on the ground and see what's going on with my own eyes is something that has been important for me whenever I could do it. And since I am based in DC, West Virginia is not that far. And being that environmental issues are something that I've been covering for a really long time and is probably the closest to my heart. Um, I felt like I really needed to go there in person and see what was going on, as West Virginia is kind of experiencing this transition period from coal to oil and gas via fracking. And this transition could just as easily be a just transition to something sustainable, but it's not, of course, because that's not how our system works. And so I was familiar with some of the history of West Virginia, but I was purely ignorant about some of the radical history, and that's of course by design, right? We're not taught about the radical history where coal miners, black and white, took up guns together in the beginning of the 20th century and shot at coal barons and actually won some basic workers' rights. They don't teach you that, of course, on purpose, because if they told you, hey, if you ever have a problem, just go find your friends, pick up some guns, threaten the security of the state, and you might get something. Like they can't say that out loud. So this history is buried, literally and figuratively. And so I was completely ignorant of that. And when I found out about it, the article and the short segment that I was planning on doing, it turned into a film because I realized I really need to put some more effort behind this story and really try to make more of a platform for the people that I'm talking to, that needs to be longer form than just a small article or segment.
Whoa, that's awesome. Yeah, like that uprising was really awesome, and like you said, the fact that that it's black and white in the early 20th century is like that's almost unheard of. So, Novi, did you want to ask what was the first question?
so with regards to the documentary, I actually had a lot of questions. Uh, so you said environmental issues were probably the closest and nearest to your heart. What was it that first got you into that? Like, for example, it was me seeing the fish in the creek and the pond dying nearby where I lived because construction companies were polluting the water one summer. What was your catalyst, as it were?
Um, my catalyst was pretty, uh, as my friend likes to say, "Wow, that's white." It came from me just walking around my neighborhood and seeing trash like in the like on the side of the road and being like, I don't like that, and then just picking it up. And so I became known as kind of like the weird high school kid that walked around my neighborhood and picked up trash. And then that kind of like literally became kind of rings that kept getting larger and larger, and I started looking into whether we actually recycle or does that just end up in some landfill, which unfortunately it does. And I started trying to work inside of my community to address environmental issues. And then, of course, because I was still suffering at the time from this kind of white saviorism complex, I was like, I'm going to raise money and buy a piece of rainforest, which is, I mean, it's very cute, but it's kind of ridiculous because no one, like, it's not like Bolsonaro would care if I bought a plot of rainforest. It's not like he's gonna be like, oh, this is Eleanor's plot, I'm gonna steer clear. But it was my start, right? And as Malcolm X says, there was a time when you didn't know what you know now, and that was a lot. And so it kind of started with that, and then snowballed into larger issues. And it took me a while before I was able to connect eco issues to, the larger umbrella issue of capitalism, war. I shifted to only care about war ahead of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And I didn't really understand then that, of course, that's tied to climate change. It's tied to eco issues. The U.S. military is the largest the largest polluter in the world. It's equal to 140 countries in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But I didn't know that at the time. I thought that these were like separate siloed issues, which is, of course, also what they want you to think, that, these are separate issues and there aren't intersections. So I'd say that I started literally and figuratively small, and then snowballed, and along the way had a lot of rad people set me straight, hold my hand. A lot of rad people that don't know me that I knew through books or things like that, but also a lot of rad organizers on the ground as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you have to start somewhere with all this. Like, I was 8 years old seeing these fish dying, and finding out about the water district and people charging more for water depending on where you lived, and it was disproportionately affecting poor and minority communities. So it's something that you have to start somewhere, and it's pretty cool that you started as early as you did, because it could take longer for people, and some people never really wake up to what's going on. Um, so I know that West Virginia, as in many rural states, religion is probably a more dominant thing in there. Did you notice what role churches and other religious organizations had this? Were they more uh, pushing for the establishment theory of thought, or were there some people who were trying to organize with environmental issues? Like, what role did you see playing in that?
I mean, that's a great question. To be honest, I didn't interact with any churches while I was there, partially because the people that I was talking to weren't didn't never ask me to meet up at a church, didn't invite me to church or anything like that. Also, because it's not somewhere that I go. I'm not Christian. As I tell people, I was born Jewish, became an agnostic atheist through my own through my own experiences. But I think from what I've experienced in the South growing up there, and from what I've heard from, I've now been in touch with a lot of people in the film since I made the film, which was in 2019, and they the churches fall in line with the state a lot of times. It's to the point where in a lot of churches they'll tell you who to vote for, which unfortunately in the South is oftentimes a Republican. I will say, though, West Virginia was very pro Bernie, just for the simple fact that he was speaking to them. And, having organized and lived in the South, I can say that the idea that these people are just stupid and therefore vote for Republicans is, I think, one of the biggest problems that the left has in terms of organizing, is it just assumes that people are dumb. But, we're not, they're not. And I think that, the issue is that the Democrats don't speak to them. They talk to them like they are dumb. And people know when you're talking to, when you talk to someone like they're an idiot, and so I think that people tend to veer to the right. And just like one of the people says in the film, Terry, he says, we were propagandized for Trump. We were set up for Trump. And that's so true. It was set up like a perfect T-ball. Hillary Clinton was never going to make inroads there. And so I think a lot of that is tied to the church, and, why politicians always have to say BS like God bless America, regardless of whether they think that or know that or feel that. But I think churches do have a pivotal role, and churches are also part of that culture that includes Cole, that includes having this pride in oppression. That is really unfortunately twisted. And I think that the church does play a large role in that. That being said, I think that there also are radical churches. And I think that, most of them are probably in communities that aren't white. The radical churches that I've personally been to have all been predominantly non-white congregations. But yeah, I think that the church in and of itself has a really twisted role in the history of the US and the history of oppressing people. But I do think that there can also be some radical organizing that happens in those spaces.
Yeah.
Before we move on to Austin's questions, I just want to say, all three of us, we're in the deep South. I'm in South Carolina, Novi there in
I grew up in Texas, went to undergrad in Arkansas, and now I'm living in Louisiana.
And Austin is in Alabama. But Austin, did you have anything you want to ask?
Oh, so many things. You're like, I looked at your LinkedIn and everything because I guess whatever, doing the research, and you have like a really cool like tech background to me, and as I have this thought that every citizen a journalist, and I think that especially with the sensors that we get to carry around in our phones and whatnot, it does give us some power. And I was wondering if you had any tips for anybody like out in the field, tech tips or anything about capturing moments that are important for people's safety and whatnot.
I mean, do you mean like in terms of not showing faces, or do you mean in terms of if your then phone gets confiscated, to how to make sure that whatever you film doesn't get erased?
Not so much the erasure, but the ethics of working out and being out in the field if you're a citizen and you consider yourself to be doing the citizen journalism.
Yeah, for sure. I actually do a political education or like a Skillshare bit about this, and it's basically like how not to be a dick media person, because frontline communities and frontline fighters are constantly bombarded with people who don't care about their safety and security, and who will make fun of them if they use a fake name or something like that. And so I always like the most recent thing that I did was last year. I went to the Pacific Northwest to talk to folks that were defending forests up there. And I said, you can withdraw consent at any time, and then you can watch me erase what we've talked about. I have no right to share or put out anything that you don't feel comfortable with. Of course, I will be operating under the assumption that I am continuing with that consent until you tell me otherwise. But my goal is to, you know, you can never watch people in their original habitat because you being there makes it not natural anymore. But the goal is to you know, really embed with them. You know, I stayed with them. I climbed trees with them, which was terrifying because I do not like heights. But I did my best, and you know, made it clear that I'm on their side, that I am not there to try and give this this attempt at an impartial view, because there's no such thing as impartial journalism. How you tell the story, how you decide to frame it, that is based on what you think. You never walk into it. I oftentimes use the example, like, let's say it's raining. Okay, well, if you're a weather person, you can say it's raining. But even then, you have an obligation to talk about, like, well, what kind of rain is this normal, etc. But if you're a journalist, okay, what's the story? Is the story, wow, this is really unnatural and climate change is the reason for this rain? Are you going to talk to the rich guy about what this means for his yacht? Are you going to talk to the unhoused person about what this means for their ability to survive? Who you talk to, how you frame the story makes it immediately subjective. So there's no such thing as objective journalism. And so I tell people up front that I'm on your side. I want to protect these trees too. I want to be grinding the gears of the system. And so I think it's important to be upfront with your intentions. Now, of course, if you're like, if you're embedding in some kind of like right wing space to get them on camera
For
saying
comedy.
something stupid, then don't be honest, because you could be at risk. But yeah, I mean, I'd say just be upfront with folks about what you're writing, what you're filming. And then there are apps, like if you're using your phone, there are apps that immediately blur people's faces. I can't remember the name of them offhand, but there are apps that do that. So even if you're live streaming, then that can be something that's automatically done. I would say also, in terms of live streaming, be very conscious that it's not just faces. Like I have tattoos, people can recognize me from those. My hair is pretty recognizable. People have things that identify them outside of just their face. So be super conscious of that, especially if you're filming something like, you know, tearing down a statue, for instance. That was a big thing that popped up when that was happening during the uprising. And just ask yourself, like, do I need to be live streaming this, or do I need to take pictures of this? There's kind of this push to always have a hot take about everything, to always publish something, to always put something online, and you don't actually have to. Your take could be in that moment to sit back and watch. Or to, you know, maybe it's better to write an article and not even include images. I think the use of the particularly visual content by those who are trying to silence us and trying to further our oppression should not be diminished. And so I think it's really important to ask ourselves if we need to be gathering that kind of information in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
What's your activism? Sorry, I was getting a noise coming from like one of the mics.
Yeah, my bad. Thank you for that. Especially with the auto blurring stuff, that's really cool. But
yeah, I can try to find out what it's called. I remember it became pretty popular during the uprisings, and there's a lot of other like pointers and ideas that I have that I've come across in my time, but I didn't want to take up too much blathering on about that.
No, excellent. Thank you.
There's similar apps where you can use for archival research and for distorting voices in case voices need to be obscured for some reason. It's something that we've studied in archival studies. So, did you set out wanting to do this? Is that something that you wanted to do from an early age?
Sorry, doing what now?
Doing investigative journalism.
No, I kind of fell into it through audio, actually. I worked in recording studios in Los Angeles for basically from the time I was 18 till I left in 2015 when I was 28. And I worked as a tech. So my job was to basically make sure that all of the gear at the studio ran properly. And so a magazine approached me about writing like a tech article about, an ongoing tech article about like, hey, here's how you fix your own XLR cables and stuff like that. And so I had always done writing, but I hadn't done journalism before, and I didn't go to school for it. I basically just started writing and found out that I really actually enjoyed writing articles. And then right around Occupy, Occupy LA was happening down the street from where I lived in downtown LA. And so I just walked down there and I was like, do you all need like anybody to write stuff that isn't, CNN? So I started writing as part of Occupy, and then I started working with Occupy.com. And from there, it kind of, again, snowballed. And I started doing things that weren't just about Occupy and money and politics, but a lot about environmental issues, war, U.S. imperialism, and again, connecting these issues. So it wasn't something that I had originally set my sights on. It was, when I left high school, I had every intention of either becoming a rock star or becoming a theater star, neither of which really happened, although I did do music for quite some time. But the journalism happened just kind of by chance, I guess.
So speaking of your music, we listened to Pyre, and then I didn't realize that was you singing on the opening of Common Censored, and it's very awesome. Now, how long have you been singing, and when did you start connecting the activism to and political activism and to your music?
So I started singing it when I was 4, and I started singing opera and choir. And then when I was like in middle school, my brother handed me a Guns N' Roses album, and I have never looked back. No, that's not true. I still love opera, and I have a soft spot for weird, obscure like choral music. But I moved to LA to become a rock star when I was 18, and started a few different bands, but one that really combined music and politics was called Rooftop Revolutionaries, and it was really an epiphany that I had because I was working on political organizing, and then I was also doing the music. And then I was like, well, why don't I just combine the two? It's not like it's never been done. And we had a great run. I'm very proud of the work that we did. We opened for folks like Tom Morello and Helmet, and we toured. And I'm very proud of the work that we did. And then the band, like bands do, broke up in a pretty cliche way, as bands do. And I decided that I would try doing my own stuff, which I still feel a little, I miss having a band, especially because when you look back at something, you always look back through rose-colored glasses. So like, I don't think about the shitty band fights we had at 3 a.m. in a parking lot when we just finished playing a show for the bartender. I think about all the fun times. And so I do miss having a band, but I think, the solo music is it's a great outlet for me. And I'm excited that people dig it. So yeah.
Before I'm going to pass it on one more, but I was in a band for a while too. Then we did a little bit of touring, and playing with the bartender is like, it can have its perks, but what ended up like, I guess we broke up in that kind of fashion too. And right now I am actually in the middle of trying to do like solo, and I'm doesn't matter about the genre or anything. I just wanted to ask what tips would you give to try and do combined political activism and music? Because sometimes it just feels hard, and sometimes it just feels cheesy because I'm just like, I don't want to like I want to be more like direct, but at the same time, I don't want to be direct to the point where I sound like I'm trying to make like a new anthem or a new like, yeah.
I'd say the best advice I ever got from an engineer who actually did Rage Against the Machine. He said, just stop thinking. And it was, I mean, it's great advice for a lot of reasons. One, because I think, especially if you're writing lyrics, we tend to overanalyze and overthink, and it gets messy up there quick. But also, if you've ever worked, like if you've ever been on the other side of glass and been recording a band or an artist or whatever, you can tell we call it red light fever. When that red light turns on and they know they're being recorded, they start thinking about it and it sucks. It gets stale, it gets rigid. But if you just start recording and you don't tell them that you're recording and they just roll with it, you get some of the most organic, beautiful sounds. And I think part of that is because you just lean back into what it is that you know deep down that you want to get out. And I think that, what, especially with political music, part of the kind of juxtaposition is like, well, I am a thinker. I'm not writing just a cheesy love song, so I have to think in order to get this stuff out there. But it's already in you. You already have this political passion that's like coursing through your veins. All you have to do is let it fall out. You have to let it drip out, as opposed to trying to like squeeze it in a certain way. So it can sound trite, but really just let go. I feel like the times that I've written something brilliant is when I'm like about to get on a bus, I've got 14 bags in my hands, and then I'm like, oh, I have to write this down. So even if I miss this bus, I have to write this down so that I don't forget it. It's not when I'm sitting here and I've got the mood lighting and everything's perfect and I sit down to write. That's never worked for me. If it works for anybody else, I'm so jealous. But I think really like the best advice I can give is just let it go and see what happens. And if it sucks, that's cool. The next one won't.
Right. I remember those days from playing in a jazz band and doing classical and electronic music before the pandemic. Usually you're just scribbling down chord changes on a napkin and some random notes before you go up there.
Totally.
Oh yeah. And then doing the engineering work and just not telling people or waiting for them to chill out before they actually started, because those first few minutes when people are actually thinking are rough, generally speaking.
Totally.
They are. So what did you go to school for?
Well, I originally went to UCSB for a year, and then I dropped out, and then I eventually finished Bachelor of Science in Audio.
Mm.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to ask, I know you as especially would know the censorship going on right now, and the particularly with RT. I know Lee's show just got like just disappeared from the internet. So how is that? What do you make of all this and the sanctions and the censorship and the xenophobia at the moment?
It's horrifying, and I mean, it'd be funny if it wasn't pushing us so close to nuclear war and if it wasn't killing a bunch of people.
Yeah.
I mean, just first of all, with the sanctions, the economic warfare, it's horrifying that a lot of people applaud that as kind of an alternative to war, because it is war. When you stop people from getting the basic needs that they require to survive, you're killing them. It doesn't matter if they died from dropping a bomb or from that. And you could even argue that it's far more cruel to let them die slowly without access to medicine or food. For instance, Madeline, who just recently died, and God, if I find out where they buried her, I'll be dancing on that grave. She famously told Leslie, she famously told Leslie Stahl in an interview on 60 Minutes that she felt that it was worth it that 500,000 Iraqi children died due to sanctions. I don't have any words to describe how absolutely horrifying that is, but that's what sanctions do.
And slowly.
Yeah, exactly. Slowly. Our sanctions in Venezuela have killed tens of thousands of people. Our sanctions in Iran same thing. I mean, the sanctions that we do anywhere, and folks can find out more about the sanctions that we have against dozens of countries over at sanctionskill.org. It's a great organization that covers this issue specifically. But people have already said that the sanctions in Afghanistan, for instance, are set to kill more people in 1 year than in 20 years of war. So that gives you an idea of how horrifying sanctions are. And sanctions against Russia, you think Putin's actually going to be affected by the sanctions, or like any rich people? No, it's going to be like kids and people who are at risk, disabled folks. And so that's absolutely horrific. Also, just this continuous poking of the Russian bear that's been going on, since World War II is disgusting, and necessary context is completely missing from the narrative that is allowed on American airwaves. There's absolutely no contextualizing of this situation. And look, I don't like Putin. I don't like any lead head of state anywhere. I have yet to meet one that I like. And that's also the thing. It's not a binary. If I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, right? It's like it's not an either or. I'm against Putin. I'm against Biden and the U.S. empire. But me as an American, my lane is Biden. Okay, I have no say in who's running Russia. That is not my lane. And it's also very important for me as a child of empire to highlight the empire's role in all this, because if you don't talk about that, you can't understand why what's going on in Ukraine is going on. If you have no understanding of NATO, if you have no understanding of the decades of, again, poking that Russian bear, and the people who were contextualizing this on a larger scale, people like Lee Camp, people like Chris Hedges, the folks that had found a platform via RT America, they have been completely struck. And there's a reason that they've been struck, right? It's not because, it just happened to be a side effect of the sanction. No, that was done with precision, because otherwise, for instance, Lee Camp's personal podcast wouldn't have been censored off of Spotify. So, I mean, this is done on purpose. It's to ensure that the propagandization of the U.S. Populace goes on as smoothly as possible, and that the people who have anything to say about U.S. imperialism against war, against any war, are immediately silenced. And it's grotesque. And anybody who cares about peace, anybody with that Ukrainian flag hanging off of their balcony or whatever the hell, if you actually are hanging that out there because you want peace and not just hanging that because you want nuclear war, then you need to understand the context of what's going on. And I really do suggest that you take that flag down.
It's extremely frustrating, especially as somebody. It's interesting how people will rejoice and say, like, oh, these are the good immigrants. These are, when people come through and they're willing to come up with discrimination, they're willing to assimilate and do things in order to become successful, or at least disappear from the public eye, and say, like, oh, these are, and they're doing a good job. But as soon as war comes around, people are being subjugated and persecuted once again. Like, I know for a fact that my last name was changed and my first name was translated into English and my mom's name was translated into English because it was not a good idea during the Cold War to have a Slavic name. It was a good idea to have a Turkish name. And that's just a small example. And it's frustrating to see the xenophobia, the Russophobia, Islamophobia stuff going on, especially with people who are minorities and people of color, because of how how it's so close to being on this knife edge of where you're accepted and then you're not. So, have you noticed the change in rhetoric and change of how people have been treated just in the context of a few months with this Ukrainian war?
Well, I have noticed So there's a restaurant here in DC called Russia House that is excellent. I'm assuming they're closed now forever, but I was walking by it the other day and somebody had thrown, I guess, rocks like through the windows.
It's terrible.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
I was like, wow, Putin must really be hurting on that one. Like, what are you?
Anything Russian. It's terrible.
Right. And it's just so ridiculous because, again, this idea that anything Russian is evil, it allows you to push towards a nuclear war that annihilates an entire country. And let's be honest, we would also be on the chop block. So I really don't know why people are so gung ho about the concept. It's not like we have some shield or something that would stop nuclear bombs, but it's a classic way to manufacture consent for war. It's dehumanizing people, right? Same thing that happens in the Middle East. Oh, well, the people of Afghanistan or Iraq, they're not really people, right? Jews in the Second World War, Romani, LGBTQ folks, communists, whatever, they're not really people. So it's not like we're actually killing people. So it's not that bad. We see that same thing happening here. People talk about Russians like they're, like they're less than animals. I don't even like saying animals because people love animals. So, like, I don't even think that comparison makes sense. But people talk about Russians in such derogatory and blanket terms, right? This idea that you could never meet a Russian that was a good person. You could never meet a Russian that deserved to thrive. And it's really horrifying how easily people can be turned to think that way. And again, total lack of context, like total lack of understanding that, the US is actually the one that installed Putin. And, there's like a total lack of understanding with regards to the history. And of course, just the fact that, Russia lost some like upwards of 20 million people in World War II, and was very clear about what NATO's role could be in order to keep Russia from reacting. And NATO just completely ignored that from the advent of NATO. So I think, again, the context is completely missing, and the voices that push people back from the abyss of nuclear war are missing, and that's totally on purpose. And it's really scary to see how easily people can be twisted to hate an entire nation, an entire nation of human beings that I'm going to butcher this quote, but it was an Iranian filmmaker who said that you and I have more in common than I have with my government or that you have with your government. And it's so true. And the only way that we can move past this concept of dehumanization is to understand that we have way more in common with the average Russian person than they have with Putin and that we have with Biden.
Oh, 100%. And
we're coming up on time. If there's any other questions y'all want to ask before, because I know, Eleanor, we said we were going to do like 35 minutes, I think.
Oh, I thought you said 45. I'm sorry.
45?
Whatever.
Okay. Oh, well, 45, that's fine. I'll just know I didn't want to go over time, but no, you can keep going.
100%. And one of the things that you notice, especially in academia, and with independent scholars, is when I started studying history and music history at school, Eastern European studies, Middle Eastern studies, these are consistently defunded. We do not have researchers. At the university I currently go to grad school is, there is not a single researcher that is focused on Eastern Europe or the Middle East, period. And it's a flagship university, one of the largest universities in the world, one of the top research facilities in the world, and there's not any historians working on those areas. That's not a medieval scholar. Like, outside of the one religious scholar, there's nobody. And how are you supposed to learn? How are you supposed to study? How are you supposed to publish articles of this and help combat this disinformation if there's no research being done? Like, there was more work being done on these areas in the music department and the religion department than anywhere else in the university. So the silencing of information and is pervasive everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
It's disgusting.
Now, what any projects that you have coming up anytime soon, or?
Um, there is a lot going on right now, but it's not really in my professional realm at the moment. But I have started co-hosting the Project Censored radio show, which is really rad. You can check that out over at projectcensored.org. The episode that's coming up this coming week is with the folks from Defend Atlanta Forest, which is such a rad effort that covers the intersections of gentrification, war, police brutality, and systemic racism, and just, I mean, it's really really powerful. So I'm doing that. Lee and I are still doing Common Censored, though not as frequently as we were. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what I'm doing now is kind of like behind the scenes stuff that it's not really out there as much. I've been doing mutual aid since the pandemic started here in DC, and I really recommend folks get involved in mutual aid networks or just community organizing, because I think it's a rad way not just to fight whatever issues and whatever systems are in your space, but also to imagine and build for the future. Because I think if we are always just fighting back on our heels, then we're never actually talking about what we want and talking about what's beautiful and joyful in the world. And I think it's so important to remember, what are you fighting for? Because if you don't know, then you'll always just be fighting, and before you know it, you're in some crappy like remake of Romeo and Juliet, and you just hate things because they're there. And I think that it's really important to highlight what's positive and what should be built in the ashes of this system, because we can start building that now, right? Like, you don't want to like be standing in the ashes of the old house and not have plans for the new one, right? you gotta you gotta start building now, so
Dual
that when
power.
things get even rockier and the very foundations of this empire do shake and crumble, we have something to hold on to, and we have each other to go to. And I think particularly in the United States, that is really lacking. There is such a culture of individualism, and a really there's so much about community that is just not highlighted and totally erased. And so I think it's important to start building that through however that looks wherever you are.
I'm going to take a question from the comment box real fast. It's from Alex Suarez, and he asks, what's the best way do you think to fight censorship?
It's a great question, Alex. And I think the best way to combat it is to connect with the people who make important dissident content in whatever ways you can. Lee and I started a website called radindiemedia.com. And that's a place that it's basically like an aggregate for alternative independent media. And so we pull from a lot of sources. We're constantly getting suggestions for more sources, and adding those as well. But it's a great place to go in order to find content from voices that are being silenced. People who were just recently purged from RT America, you'll find there, and Sputnik Radio and things like that. So I'd say do the extra work of finding those dissident voices. And also, media literacy is so important. We have to educate ourselves on the very, very sneaky and creative ways that the system and that empire have of making us believe certain things. When you read an article, how are they twisting words and like lying through omission and all of these things? Like, we need to educate ourselves on the creative ways that we are propagandized, and that's super hard. And it's because you grow up in it, right? Like, the fish doesn't know they're in water, and we have to constantly question what we're reading. And so I think supporting, if you can, supporting the folks that do great work, and then also just finding those people and uplifting their voices however you can, even if that's like, again, through some kind of political education group that you have in your area as well.
Awesome. Well, Eleanor, we're coming up on time. And is there any other websites? Because I've gone and opened up like four new tabs since you've been on, and I'm like, I'm gonna go check these out. But is there anything else you want to plug before we get out of here?
Oh, geez. Probably yes. I'm definitely gonna forget something, but y'all can folks can follow me at artkillingapathy.com. And as I mentioned, radindymedia.com is a great aggregate of these news sources that folks can go to. And in terms of mutual aid groups, if people are curious, I know that at the beginning of the pandemic, It's Going Down, which is a great radical resource. They had a list of local mutual aid groups. They might still have it up. Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is another great organization that you can plug into, and you could probably just email them and be like, "Hey, I live in Poughkeepsie. What's my closest mutual aid group?" And they might even be able to tell you. So yeah, those are some off the top of my head that that folks can check out for those purposes as well.
All right, and we'd love to have you come back if you're up to it.
Yeah, and this time I won't suck so bad at writing the proper date in my calendar.
It's all good.
It's okay.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and you've been tuning into People's Voice Network, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much.